Hi there, and welcome back to our Espresso at Home series. I'm Kathryn, and this is the last lesson in the series. Today, we'll be talking about the science of milks and also alternative or non-dairy milks. I've mentioned that the technique is identical when it comes to steaming, whether you're steaming an alt milk or a normal milk, but it does seem worth going through the differences in each and covering what makes one harder, what makes each one unique, because they all have these different properties due to their chemical makeup. Now, there are a lot of varieties of a lot of the alt milks, and many of them are now blends. So they're not just one nut or grain or legume, they're pulped, they're added to water. They have these other added proteins, other added oils, other added sugars to try to hit a specific nutritional profile or a flavor profile. In the case of barista blends, sometimes to hit a chemical profile that steams and foams really nicely. So take all of this information with a little grain of salt, but I did want to cover the basics. So for the science, we'll start with dairy. Whole milk is sort of the standard, right? Back in Italy, it's the old tradition, and it's relatively really easy to steam. So we're always trying to formulate these other options that steam like whole milk. If you pick up whole milk at the store, it's usually about 3.25% milk fat and has very specific proteins and sugars. So starting with the sugars, the sugar in milk, lactose, is one that tastes uniquely sweeter at warmer temperatures. You'll notice that a steamed cup of milk tastes sweeter than cold milk just by itself. For me, I find that a well-made plain latte is really sweet and I don't really want to add anything to it, but sometimes an iced latte might need a little something to be more interesting. I do actually rarely drink iced lattes, kind of for that reason. I just don't enjoy them that much. I don't want to add a bunch of flavors on top of my coffee. But anyways, as for proteins, they are what actually cause the foaming. The proteins form these little structures around your air bubbles. They sort of bend out of their normal shape and they hold those air bubbles in a nice foam. But at too high of a temperature, the proteins actually completely break down. They don't hold foam together anymore and they just taste gross. Proteins also do start to break down the older milk gets. That can break down even from exposure to light. Acids also break down these proteins. When you break down your proteins too much, the milk curdles. This also happens at the end of a milk's shelf life when it starts to go bad, but obviously not all curdling is from the milk going bad. However, it's still usually undesirable unless your intent was to start making cheese. The breakdown of the proteins and the eventual curdling does happen with all alt milks as well. Their proteins do break down as well under many of the same conditions. Curdling is not just a unique dairy problem. And some alt milks actually curdle faster than dairy. Onto fat. Fat in milk does two main things. It actually slows the foaming process. The proteins that want to structure around your air bubbles, they might structure around the milk fat instead. So it slows your foaming, but it also adds that really smooth, that heavy mouthfeel, the creaminess alongside foam. It takes it from a really airy, stiff, structured foam to a smooth, flowing, easy to pour, really creamy feeling foam. So skim milk, obviously, very similar to whole milk. It has the same proteins, the same sugars, but now the fat has been skimmed off. So you can still steam skim because you have the same amount of protein, but since there's no fat, your foam will happen a little faster. You don't have that fat to slow the process, and it won't have the same creamy mouthfeel because all of the cream is gone. It might be a little puffier, a little airier. So soy is the first alt milk I'll cover. Soy has been around quite a bit longer than the other alt milks, and like many food trends, it had a day where everyone was convinced it was a superfood, it was the best for you, it had so many health benefits, it's so good for the environment, and then it had a day where it was demonized. It was a huge health risk. It's so bad for the environment. Given how frequently this happens with food, I think the safest bet is everything in moderation and don't get caught up in the next wave. But we're here to talk about this milk in the context of milk steaming. Soy milk has almost as much protein as dairy. And remember that proteins are what create the structure of milk foam. So it should steam up pretty easily. It has a good amount of that protein. It's typically a little lower in fat than whole milk. That was one of the reasons for the food health craze things. So it will be less thick, less creamy, and it doesn't have a lot of natural sugar. Most often, what this actually means is that soy blends will be sweetened. So you'll have a nice flavor, but that isn't strictly necessary. As far as flavor, soybeans are legumes. Soybeans taste kind of like beans, sort of earthy, sort of vegetal. That doesn't impact the steaming, but it does impact the overall impression of, say, a plain cappuccino. Also, soy will curdle at a higher pH, that is a less acidic liquid than dairy. And remember that heat causes curdling even faster. So soy milks might start to curdle in a hot latte with a little bit more acidic of a bean, where normal dairy wouldn't actually curdle. If you have a coffee on the more acidic side, this is worth considering. Coconut milk is the next one. I'm biased. I love coconut milk. Let me throw that out there first. I mostly drink dairy when I'm at a cafe because I don't need to pay an extra $1 for the upcharge. I don't actually need it. I can have dairy, but I really like coconut milk. Sometimes I choose it at home. So I will try to be as objective as I can talking about it. Coconut milk is, I think, quite tricky to do well with taste. It might just be that I can personally distinguish the taste better than other milks since I like it and I'm more familiar with the taste. But I've had some really, really watery coconut milks and then some really, really good ones. So guessing how your coconut milk will turn out for taste might require looking at the fat and the protein content on the package to guess at how much coconut is actually in the milk versus water. Coconut itself is pretty high in fat. It's almost always going to be higher in fat than any of the other milks I'm talking about today, unless it was blended to be a low-fat version. And sometimes it's even a higher fat than whole milk. So you get a really creamy final product when you steam it up. It doesn't have a lot of protein though, so it can be a bit more challenging to actually get that micro foam. You'll have to stretch your milk a little longer and the foam will always fall apart a little faster. Coconut's flavor, while nutty, is on the naturally sweeter side as opposed to, say, almond milk, which is nutty but is on the more bitter side. And that sweetness more closely aligns with the regular flavor of dairy milk. Obviously, if you hate coconut, you won't like the flavor, but that's true of all alt milks. I just think coconut has the most similar flavor profile to milk without doing things like adding these extra oils or adding these extra sugars to match the flavor. It'll be just a little nutty and it'll be a little bit sweet all by itself. So almond milk is also going to be high in fat as compared to oat and soy, but it's not as high in fat as dairy and coconut. It's also, like coconut, lower in protein. So a lot of the same things apply to the steaming. The foam will break back down faster and it needs a little longer on the steam wand. You have to get more steam into this milk. When I steam, it's easy to end up with a rather watery texture. Once it's made though, it will be creamier typically than oat or soy milk will be. As for flavor, almonds, as I mentioned, have a little bit of a bitter flavor overall, so it's oftentimes sweetened. If it's not, it'll be on that bitter side. Almonds also have that distinct nuttiness, but there are a lot of coffees with almond as one of their flavor notes. Nuttiness in coffee is often a good thing. It's often desirable. So for many people, it actually pairs really nicely with coffee. Oat milk, the last one that I'll talk about a lot, is the big trend right now. Without being too much of a cynic, it does feel a little like it's following the same trajectory as all the other oat milks have, and especially soy. But what makes it special? Oats have a little more protein than almond milk, though not quite as much as soy or oat. And it's also really low in fat, which sounds nice from a health perspective, but that does mean it lacks some of the creaminess found in milks. Although, as a result of this, the milk often does have oils added back into it, especially if it's one that's been designed for steaming. As for flavor, oat's really interesting because a lot of people are familiar with oatmeal, and so they kind of already have a sense of what oats soaked in water taste like, and that's kind of a divisive thing. It is a grain, so it tastes just a little earthy, and it's really popular in drinks made with honey. I don't know if that is also just a trend, people who like honey like oat milk, or if it's because you have this flour pollen product with grain and it's like a lovely little plant marriage. I've tried it, and actually having some kind of honey in my latte is my favorite way to have oat milk if I'm going to have oat milk. It's a really nice flavor. It might also remind me a little bit of Honey Nut Cheerios. Good or bad, take your pick. As I mentioned, there are a lot of blends, and there are more and more alt milks popping up all the time. And to be honest, I picked the ones I talked about because I've worked with them. I have tasted some other milks like rice milk, macadamia nut, cashew milk, but I've never steamed any of them myself. And there are just more and more and more all the time. And special milk blends that are all kinds of blends of ingredients. And my advice on all of the rest of these that I haven't covered is keep in mind what each piece of the milk does. The fats, the carbs and sugars, the proteins. Take a look at the nutritional content, not just to see the nutritional facts, but also to get a sense of how much protein to how much fat, or if there's any sugar. Will this milk be completely unsweet or is it sweetened? That's the end of this video and the end of the series on home espresso, but you can find all kinds of other classes at sagebrushcoffee.com. Thanks again for watching. I'm Kathryn, and I hope you have a great day.